Welcome, everyone, to the LEAD1 angle, where we discuss important issues in college sports with key players. My name's Tom McMillan. I'm the CEO of LEAD1, and thanks for being here today. We're pleased to have as our guest Ryan Bamford, the athletic director at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Ryan's been there since 2015. We both came about the same time. I came to LEAD1 around 2015 too, and before that, Ryan was at Georgia Tech and Yale. Today, we're going to talk about the recent NCAA enforcement action against the University of Massachusetts and get some perspective on that from Ryan. So, Ryan, let's start out with that. Tell us just the high level what happened.
Yeah, so I arrived at UMass in 2015. We discovered some potential violations in 2 years into my tenure in 2017 that dated back to 2014. Brought those forward to the NCAA. Did a full scale, review of our compliance efforts, our financial aid efforts. And really, at the end of the day, some of the things that gave rise to our initial concerns ended up not being violations, or they were level 3 violations. And lo and behold, after a 5-year financial aid review from 13 to 18, we discovered that we had over awarded 12 student athletes, a total sum over those 12 student athletes of about $9,100. And so we self-reported it to the NCAA, to the enforcement staff, worked closely and collaboratively with them over a 3-year period. And from 2017 to 2020, this thing has continued to drag on. We actually thought, Tom, we were in a negotiated resolution scenario. This was a perfect case, a clerical error, administrative in nature, totally unintentional, where these student athletes received just above the cost of attendance for some random charges, housing and telecom fees. And we thought it was built, tailor-made for the new negotiated resolution process. Had that built with the enforcement staff, agreed on penalties of 1 year probation and $5,000 fine. Sent that into the Committee on Infractions panel. A panel of 3 reviews it, and they rejected it to our surprise and to the surprise of the enforcement staff. And so from there, we had to go in front of the Committee on Infractions and defended ourselves on September 24th of this year. And then just a week or two ago, got the penalties. Really disappointed at the end of the day because we felt like we didn't gain an advantage in competition or in recruiting or anything of that nature. Didn't really have any sense that we had actually committed these violations at the time. Neither did our coaches or even our student athletes. And so the 2 years of probation, the $5,000 fine, and having to vacate wins in men's basketball and women's tennis, the two sports that were impacted, we just felt was an overreach. And so we're going to appeal. We let the NCAA know last Friday that we were going to appeal the decision and hopefully get it reversed in some form or fashion.
Well, it reminds me kind of going through a speed trap with cameras, and I've done this a few times myself, where you go through it and you get a bill later on, and you pay the bill, you're not happy about it. And obviously you pay attention next time, but they don't take your license away. They don't take your license away. I mean, I was noticing what your Commissioner McGlade said about it. Was this whole thing was inadvertent, unintentional, and it just seems like it's a tough penalty for student athletes who had nothing to do with it.
For your speeding analogy, it would be like I called the cops and said, "Hey, I think I was speeding on July 13th."
That's right.
And
That's right.
and I think you should give me a ticket, and I'll be happy to pay it. And let's keep this out of court. But yeah, I guess I as a practitioner for 20 years, I think I'm most disappointed in what the outcome was. The process working with the enforcement staff was collaborative. It was healthy. I appreciate the Committee on Infractions time in reviewing our matter, but at the end of the day, they suggested that we compromised the idea of the collegiate model and fair play. And I just that doesn't measure up. The accidental nature of our violations, no intent to violate the rules, the fact that we didn't gain a recruiting or competitive advantage at all. I find it really hard this day and age with how much we're promoting the student athlete and trying to protect the student athlete that we just took those experiences away from those two teams that won games. In women's tennis, we won an Atlantic 10 championship. I have to tell those women now that, hey, your experience and what you went through, you'll always remember, but guess what? We can't recognize you as an Atlantic 10 champion and an NCAA participant anymore. I really struggle with that when our women on that team had no idea that we had made a couple $100 clerical error on their behalf that they benefited from. It just doesn't add up, doesn't compute.
I noticed that the committee on infraction said that this was because of case precedent that they've had these kind of similar cases, and they applied that case precedent to this case. But it seems to me maybe they need to throw out their case precedents here. This is I I'm puzzled by it because remember we had our meeting in Washington September 2017, and there was an FBI sting on recruiting. That's 3 years ago, and yet we haven't heard anything about those serious allegations. So, um, what do you think about the whole idea of case precedent? They use that as an argument.
Well, I certainly understand it. And I will tell you, we cited 3 or 4 cases that lined up pretty well with ours where there was no vacation of wins. There was less than a 2-year probation, in most cases, a 1-year probation. I think those two things alone surprised me in our case where we came forward, we admitted, we didn't object to any of the findings. We came forward and said the facts of the case are the facts. We agree to them. And so, the precedent that we cited, we felt like it just wasn't evaluated correctly. You know, having gone through this, Tom, I'll tell you that I'm going to be a more active participant in building legislation so this doesn't happen again. The
Right.
subjective nature of this, they fell back objectively just on precedent, but also on the exact letter of, hey, if you have somebody who's ineligible, not why they're ineligible. You got to look at why a student athlete is ineligible. Was it something they did? Was it something a coach did or an institution did to gain an advantage? In this case, it was none of those things, and no fault of our staff or our student athletes did these young people become ineligible, and so for that way, I want to try to make sure that this gets corrected. So whether it's University of Massachusetts or any institution out there, that they don't have to go through this long, protracted type of an ordeal and come out the other end not feeling good about the outcome. Because at the end of the day, I thought this was perfectly built for the negotiated resolution process to work closely with the enforcement staff, especially when we didn't dispute any of the facts. And unfortunately, they took it away from that track, and put the train on a different track. And just didn't make a lot of sense at the time, and still doesn't.
As a practitioner, you've been at this quite a while. What recommendations would you make from a policy standpoint? I mean, that's the kind of thing we're looking at. How can we make this better?
Yeah, like anything we're doing this day and age. I mean, goodness, our whole model is kind of turned upside down right now when we look at the Alston case and name, image, and likeness, and a number of other things, transfer legislation. This is just another one where, to your point, we've got a lot of things going on in college athletics from a infraction standpoint that have been alleged that for 3 years now haven't exactly been adjudicated. That to me, when you look at our case against some of those other cases, boy, it makes me scratch my head. And so I think the fact that we are as members, I'm not one to just point blame at NCAA or at a committee on infractions or anything. It's what we built as a member, and we're a proud member of the association. But I do think we need some reform, and that's got to come legislatively in some things. We've thinned down the manual, going back now, I guess anywhere from 5 to 10 years. We thinned it down. I think we've got to do some things to make it a lot more commonsensical, because this didn't, boy, we didn't rely on common sense when it came to the penalties in this case. And I know I'm biased, but I've given this to practitioners in our business all over, and they're like, Ryan, this doesn't add up. And so that I think is what's disappointing. And if I can lead some change and lead some legislative change and good effect in that respect, then that will be something positive coming out of this.
Other industries like the stock brokerage industry, they rely on more hefty fines. I mean, I know you got fined 5,000 on this, but would that have been the solution? Obviously, the school that gets to have to pay that. The kids are not affected. They had nothing to do with the violation. Are fines the answer here?
Yeah, I was not opposed to more than $5,000 in fines. I think that does impact our especially in this environment, impact our
Yeah,
financial dealings. But uh, Tom, we spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on this
I
case
know.
in lawyer
Well,
fees and other things.
that's what I find so strange. I bet you spent hundreds of thousands. I mean, you know, a
Yeah,
fine could have been easily negotiated. It seems like we're chasing the wrong person sometimes on these kinds of things, and that's why I wanted to talk to you about it because I mean, clearly, as the NCAA goes through this new structure of enforcement and investigations, you see this story come out and it kind of raises your eyebrows and say, "Wow, do we need to take a look at the whole thing?" And a lot of people have even argued that enforcement should be taken away from the NCAA. It's probably the number one reason why the general public and the press and everybody else gives the NCAA sometimes low grades because they have to be the enforcer. And whenever you're a self-regulating organization and you are the enforcer, you don't win popularity contests.
no, yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, it wasn't built to be in a lot of respects favorable for the association. I will say that John Duncan and his staff and enforcement, we had a really good working relationship through this process with them. It was healthy, it was collaborative. We opened up our books, we were transparent. I think if you looked at any Division I athletic department over a 5-year period and jumped into every aspect of its compliance efforts, you would find stuff. And we weren't surprised. No athletic department is perfect. And while we strive to be, I was really pleased with the nature of their review and what came out of it, and the fact that, hey, we made some administrative errors. One or two people did in our financial aid office and our compliance office, and they're human. And I don't fault them. I mean, we all make mistakes, and I think the thing that comes out of this that I get the feeling of is like you're now telling us we have to be perfect. We're not perfect, and but we're doing our best to not compromise the collegiate model. And I think in this way, we certainly met that obligation and that expectation.
Yeah, it did seem like overkill. 59 basketball games. I mean, it's a lot for those kids to have to go to school and then have their kind of careers wiped out when they didn't really have anything to do with something. So
Right. Right.
this is a real issue, and again, in the court of public opinion, we don't win the battles if we do things that look nonsensical to the general public, and that's my concern. When we do these kinds of enforcement actions, and then we don't aren't doing anything about some real serious allegations that are out there, whether they're right or wrong, getting some kind of adjudication to them seems to be in order. Let's turn the subject now to you talk about you guys have about 21 teams at UMass. That's quite impressive for your school, and you're trying to avoid having to cut them like other schools have done. Talk about that for a second.
Yeah, I tell you, COVID-19 has really impacted, especially in our part of the country, and how we're managing it. We're a lot different than a number of other schools across the country. We have 22,000 undergraduates, and only 1,200 of them right now are on our campus for the fall term. Just those that need labs to graduate, essentially, or anything that might be in person. And and we only have 325 of our 650 student athletes here. So about 50% of our student athletes are actually here working out and preparing. But football is playing. Men's and women's basketball and ice hockey will play in this term. And then we'll have obviously 20 of our 21 sports continue on into the spring semester. assuming everything is gonna be okay with it from the pandemic perspective. But it's been a challenge. We've had to cut, Tom, 8 million out of a $40 million budget, so 20%, and
Mm.
that comes in a wide variety of revenue streams from, obviously general operating funds from the institution, student fees, and then a number of, NCAA funds and corporate sponsor funds and things like that. And then we haven't been able to sell one ticket this year. We're not going to have any crowds at our games,
Yep.
and that's going to bring us down millions of dollars. And so we felt the impact. One of the things that I told our staff back in April and May, as this really started to take hold, and we had already sent our students and student athletes home, was I said, we've got to do our best in the next fiscal year to not make decisions that are going to impact us into our future 3, 5, 7 years down the line. If we can withstand, and just make decisions that are going to impact us in this next fiscal year, and that may, for us, it's meant furloughs for people. It's meant we've had to temporarily lay off some people, reduce their work schedule, ask our coaches to take voluntary salary reductions. We've had to cut some operating expenses, but nothing right now to date that will impact us in FY 22, 23, 24. That's been my biggest goal here, is to not let us inhibit our progress and our momentum moving into the next couple fiscal years. And so we've been able to do that. I will tell you, I'm scared to death of what the next 9 months holds, what the next 3 quarters hold in our fiscal year. We're going to bring back, I think, some students. Our plan is to bring back some students in the spring term, bring back all of our student athletes. I don't know how many competitions we're going to get in. God bless. I hope we can stay healthy. We've been really, really fortunate thus far. I think about 6,000 tests and only 4 positive tests total in our athletics department. And so we'll see, but it's a challenge to, when you're dealing obviously on the human resource side and then from a sports sponsorship side, to stay whole, try to keep people engaged, try to keep them thinking positively about what you're doing, especially when you don't have any events to support. And really, we haven't had any to date until hockey and basketball start later in November.
So you've been doing quite a bit of testing, 6,000 tests, and a lot of your kids aren't on campus right now. So
Yeah, we've done 6,000 athletics, and we test all of our student athletes twice and staff twice a week. Football actually has been being tested 3 times a week because of their competitive schedule. And as we get into hockey and basketball seasons, we'll go to 3 times a week for those sports along the NCAA guidelines. So it's been great. We've been very, very fortunate. Knock on wood, we can continue that. Our students, the ones that are here on campus, the limited amount, will go home on November 20th, which means that our basketball and ice hockey programs will have the ability to play games in December and January without any students around, which you would hope creates its own little bubble. We can get some competitions in a safe environment. And I think our peers are feeling the same thing in Hockey East and in the Atlantic 10. And so let's see if we can get the winter sports off the ground. That's the goal.
well, turning to name, image, and likeness for a little bit, how do you see all that playing out? And are there compliance issues with COVID, with all these kids being home and they're not around campus? And how do you know what they're doing or not doing? And then how does NIL fit into all that?
Yeah, so we're trying to study it. I think every institution's a little bit different. The way you've built your corporate relationships, we're in a college town. We're not in a major metropolitan area at the University of Massachusetts out here in Amherst in Western Mass, and so I would probably feel a little bit differently if we were in Boston per se. We're studying it. The one thing I'll say from a compliance standpoint is, like everybody's doing right now, we're educating our student athletes, especially those that aren't here, on where this is headed, what the ability that they have in this new environment to promote, to monetize their name, image, and likeness. There is a compliance lift. There's no doubt about it. We're starting to feel that. I'm fortunate that now I've got 3 compliance staff members that have been at other FBS institutions, have some experience. When I got here, we didn't have any that had other FBS experience in our compliance unit. That, I think, in a time like this, and when you're trying to sort through some of the ingredients associated with NIL, will really help us in that education phase. But like most things, in the Alston case being another one, we're studying what are the values associated with this. How could we had a young person in our hockey program, Cale McCarr, who was the fourth pick of the draft prior to enrolling at the university, won the Hobie Baker his sophomore year, and then just won the Rookie of the Year for the NHL, just named a month ago. Cale could have monetized his name, image, and likeness in our area to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars, probably in his 2 years, and maybe not hundreds. I exaggerated, but tens. I think he certainly could have, with a whole host of partners of ours. We're trying to figure out how does that align? Because 95% of our student athletes, maybe even higher than that, aren't going to have the value that certainly Cale or some of his peers, men and women, would have. And so trying to figure out where our niche is in some of those higher, our revenue sports, higher identity sports for us publicly, and really do our education right now, and then see what this opens up. I think it's so, even though we've been talking about it for a long time, I think as a practical, in the practical sense, still kind of new in terms of rolling it out and understanding how it's going to impact us over a longer period of time.
And we don't know how it's going to come out in the Congress. I mean, your Senator Elizabeth Warren's one of 10 senators involved in a Bill of Rights for student athletes. It could be much more expansive than NIL, name, image, and likeness. So, have you had a chance to talk to Senator Warren about this or not?
You know what? I haven't directly. Our legislative affairs folks, we've been dealing with a couple things in this state, Tom, that have been a challenge the last 3 years. They obviously legalized marijuana. It's still a banned substance on the NCAA list. We've had to do a lot of education with our young people around that. We have a marijuana dispensary that's 300 yards from our football stadium. So
Wow.
that's a challenge. We now are, thinking about legislatively as a state, dabbling in sports gambling and wagering on sports, and college sports being a part of that. So we're trying to manage some of those things legislatively in our own state. And then, of course, Senator Warren, I know Senator Murphy down in Connecticut as well is a proponent of some of these legislative items at the national level. Our legislative affairs people have gotten in the mix with her staff, and I think at a future date we'll have the opportunity to sit and talk about that. Obviously, it's been a pretty heated political season for the last 18 months or so.
Mhm.
I think after the election, maybe when things hopefully settle down in the next couple months, we'll be able to have some of that dialogue.
Well, you've been in your career at Mass and Georgia Tech and with Dan Radakovich and Yale. If you were, all powerful in college sports right now, and you could see one major reform, what would it be?
Ooh,
It's a hard one, isn't
that's
it?
a good question. I
Yeah,
hadn't. I'd have to think about that. I
yeah.
think there's, I think the things that we've seen in the last 3 years that really compromise the collegiate model, I'm struggling with, and it's these cases that haven't been adjudicated yet. It's the around men's basketball predominantly. We've got to get a handle on that. That to me is a real concern about how we move our association forward. We all want to subscribe to the ideals of this environment and to the ideals of college athletics. And we want to believe that our colleagues in coaching and our colleagues in administration are doing things on the up and up. I want people to expect that of me, and I expect that of my colleagues across this country. And so we're in a profession that in some ways I think people would tell you is a little bit under attack right now. And the best thing we can do is, and you've done a great job of liaising this for us, is really we need to get with decision makers, with lawmakers, with policymakers, whether it be at the NCAA level or federal level from a government standpoint, or at the state level and local level, and make sure that they hear the challenges that we have with any of the things that may move forward. Because I don't think some of these things end up gaining traction or do gain traction without the thoughts of the people that are in the arena dealing with this on a daily basis. And so I don't know that I could pick one thing, Tom, but I would tell you that we've got to continue to have communication, not only with all of those different constituents, but with each other. And you bringing us together, LEAD1 bringing us together, having that dialogue is really, really important.
And I agree with that. And 5 years from now, we look back, we could see literally a total free agency for student athletes, the transfer rights where they can go at will. Um, some athletes making hundreds of thousands of dollars on name, image, and likeness, maybe even additional sums from the Alston case. Um, you're going to have a very different terrain in college sports, and it becomes to look more and more professional. And so, I mean, is that a concern of yours, or how do you keep this thing in the educational box?
It's an absolutely, it's a concern. And look, I when I got into this business 20 years ago, the way that our financial models were built at the Division I institutions I've been in at are completely different than they are now in 2020. The revenue streams, but also the expenditures and the costs and what we're doing for student athletes. And I don't think as a business and as an organization and as an association, we've done a good job of telling that story about the value of what we've done for young people and what we do every day for young people. Um, I don't think any of us want it to lean towards professionalizing this enterprise and our endeavor and what we're doing in college
Mhm.
athletics. The value of what we provide to our young men and women at the University of Massachusetts, a top 25 public research university, the value of that degree, what it does for them when they leave this place, many of them not going on and playing professionally. That's what we sell here. And I know that's what a number of my colleagues across the country at other LEAD1 member institutions, they do the same thing. And for me, it's making sure that they have all of the things at their fingertips to be able to gain success while they're here at the university, but especially when they leave us and what they do for the next 40 years of their life, how they go into their communities and make positive change. That's what we're most proud of. That's what we try to build here. Not only just winning championships, but making sure they're set up for success post UMass. And I think a lot of schools do that really, really well. And I hope we continue to do that and don't lose sight of that.
Well, Ryan, those are good words to close on, because I do think it's, as we say over and over again, it's about the student athlete. And I'm glad we were able to start this with a perspective on enforcement. And I think even enforcement, we got to keep the student athlete in mind. Clearly, I know that's one of your concerns about the recent decision, but hopefully your appeal will go in the right direction. And we look forward to continue working with you. And hopefully this COVID thing will be behind us soon and we can get back to normal. So
We'll keep our fingers crossed. Tom, I appreciate the time. Thank you, man.